Hello, how are you? Thanks for being with me tonight, My name is Michael King. I'm a plein air and studio painter. Got a little better setup tonight. You can see my palette for mixing. And tonight we're going to be going over shifting color temperature within the same value. So on the board here I started some peppers, some hot peppers. And the colors that you see beside the green are just a cadmium red medium and a alizarin crimson permanent. Little caveat on the alizarin crimson: don't buy just the alizarin crimson, buy the permanent version, because alizarin crimson is fugitive otherwise. So what I did here is I just laid in the values and local color. Right, color for me doesn't really mean anything in terms of the way I think and the way I mix and the way I paint. When I think color, I just think local color. So if I'm doing a scene outdoors, trees are green, or the bark is kind of brown depending on the light we have, etc. It's just kind of local color. So that's why I filled these in. Save a little bit of time as well. Feel free to ask questions throughout if you have any. I'll try to answer them as I can. And you notice on here I'm missing all the highlights as well, but that's all right for now. So I'll just start mixing some cad red and some white, just to get a little bit lighter value. Let's see here. These will be a little bit lighter. So I'm just trying to find the shapes of light on this pepper. So I'm building it up. And I needed to get, now cad red itself, you think of it as a hot, warm color, but as soon as you add white, what happens is it grays down, so it loses chroma. So I have a color here called transparent orange from Gamblin, and it helps boost the chroma because it's a synthetic color, inorganic I believe it is, and so it holds its chroma well when mixed with white. And that's the only thing I'm thinking about right now is chroma. And then we got a little bit more down here. Some in here. And just for kicks, I'll throw in some highlights. Now I've determined from this photo that it's a cool light. So with a cool light, we also have warm shadows. It's just one of those things that's kind of set in stone. It's one of the few things. Usually rules can be broken. You can try to break this rule in representational painting, but you're not going to have that great results. They're going to be kind of awkward. Give it a shot though. And so since we have a cool light, we are going to stick with warmer shadows. So I use cad red straight. Later on, we'll probably boost the brightness and add a little bit of blue to it to keep it cool. Now you may be wondering why. Okay, well, I use cad red and white. It's not warm color. Well, no. When you compare this color and value to this, it's quite cool. Like I said, cadmium red tends to gray down, loses chromacy, and white helps cool it. So we don't have to go right into like a blue tone at all. It does it by itself just by adding white and by the nature of cad red. All cads really. So I'm just going to get this to a point where you can see what I'm talking about in terms of temperature. But right now we're going to put in a couple highlights just so you can see it come to life a little bit. Nothing spectacular. Kind of got something there. And close enough is good enough because no one's going to see the photo after I'm done. This gets quite big here. And then we have a separate one here. And we have some marks here and there that we can play with. Peppers are great because they're so gnarly that you can kind of just make it up as you go. So all in all, cad red, alizarin permanent, and white. So we have two peppers. We could make some darks darker and make it a little more interesting. Now we do that. Do a little bit of cad or alizarin crimson. But to get these darks a little bit darker, I'm going to add a little bit of ultramarine blue, just for the sake of the value, nothing to do with temperature. And maybe we'll add some darker darks in here just to get some contrast, and you make it look kind of wowish for now. Maybe just straight alizarin for this darker value here. Kind of comes up into here. All right. So this is just basically 3 colors now, more or less. You know, you got your white, alizarin permanent, and cadmium red, and then add a little bit of ultramarine blue to the deep darks. And so it's a very, I mean, we could punch the lights and stuff like that, but it's not going to be very interesting, in my opinion. So what we need to do is start shifting color temperature within the same values, right? So perhaps, well, let's do the highlights especially, right? Let's add some cerulean blue hue, which is essentially just phthalo with the white. This might be too dark. Oh, that's not bad. So we'll start cooling these shadows off, especially, and we'll match that same value that we had there before, but with some blue. And now you can really see how that changes everything. It gives it a lot more interest, kind of vibration. We'll look down here again, same thing. Without it, with it, so much different. And it's very close in value because when you squint, you can almost, the edges kind of blur. The blue arguably is a little bit lighter, which in itself is okay. Sometimes it's okay to change the value a little bit, and it makes it a little more interesting. But just that little bit of blue in there to really cool it down, because that's what the light is, it helps pop it out. Creates a lot more interest. Let's just try to get a little more of that blue-ish cad in here. There's actually some up here too by the there we go. So what about this plain red that we have? Kind of uninteresting. What can we do to make the red a little more interesting? Well, let's go towards more of an orange. So let's go with this transparent red or transparent orange that I have. I'm working in oil. This color doesn't really exist in acrylic. And we'll add a tiny bit of cad red just to get it. And we will, since it's transparent, we got to see what it's like here. Yeah, it pretty much is the same value as that red, but what it'll do now is it really starts to change it. It's made it a lot warmer. In areas. You can see how dull this one is, but we'll start to warm it up in some areas. And it'll bring a little more life to, whoops, wrong mixture. A little bit here as well. All right, now you could say, well, what about the shadows? Well, let's go with some violets. So I use ultramarine blue in my permanent alizarin because I mix my violets. I add a little bit of white so you can see it. Otherwise, it's more or less a dark black. And we will add some violets into here. And I'll try to zoom in so you can see it a little bit better. But even here, down here, you can see that that violet isn't just a static cool color. I'll put it especially beside this alizarin here. I'll see if I can zoom in for you guys. And so all of a sudden you shift the temperature here. So you got a cool red to a little warmer violet. Or you could say a warm dark red and a cool violet. Maybe add some down here. Maybe a little more white so you can see the color a little bit longer, or the violetness of it. All right. So let's zoom back out again. There we go, a little bit more. So instead of just being kind of a dreary section here, now these shadows are starting to come to life a little bit. More so than they were before. So shifting color temperature within the same value area adds a little more life to the object. All right. And now if you had a different red instead of the CAD red medium, if you had a more of a man-made red, I think naphthol red, something, I forget the name of it, something a little more synthetic, you'll get a much richer color. Like chroma is very, very determinant on the pigment you're using of the paint, without a doubt. So this is just straight CAD red. It's more for value than anything. All right. So for this little light area of the pepper, instead of just CAD red and white, let's say I'll use CAD red and some violet and some white. Now the reason I'm not using green right now, we'll try that, we'll try green in a minute, is green will kill the red of the cadmium red, and it'll make it a little more dull, so it won't have as much saturation. But even the violet right now will probably desaturate it, but the violet gives it a little more interest. Maybe we could use some of this on this other side as well. Go right into that orange, see if I can get some nice. Now the only reason I'm using this orange is because it has high chromacy. Mix it with a little bit of white, and we can start shifting this temperature here that has more chroma to a warm. Maybe we can bring that in through here. Maybe a little bit lighter. Value is so important when you're painting. Value is key, and I'd say temperature is number one, but then temperature is number two on the list. I would say that is a little bit too light. Think about lightening things. White always cools, so you got to make sure that it's still warm and relative to what you're doing. Maybe we'll add a little bit of warmth here. Bring that warmth back there. We'll use some of this violet that we had before for this edge to darken it up a little bit. And there's a little more dark in here. Use that same violet because the violet is on the warm side, so warm shadows. If you want to ensure that it's warm, you could always add a little more alizarin crimson. Now to get on this side a little bit, on the pepper on the left, we'll ensure we get a darker orange. But we'll ensure that it maybe has a little bit of phthalo, or not phthalo, but cerulean blue hue in it to darken it. So we're in the shadows, so we're going for some warm areas in those shadows. But we're keeping the value different, of course, because it's a shadow. And we're just looking at the shapes, trying to establish what we need to put where. Kind of as best you can. 6 one half does another, no one's going to know. Alright, so let's do something interesting. Since we have cool lights, let's add a little bit of Viridian into some white. So we're not really changing the chromacy of a red, we're just going to go straight Viridian. And we'll put it into some of the lighter areas. So we'll have blue highlight, mixed in with a little bit of the Viridian green. And you can see it starts creating some nice interest up here. And we'll establish the rest of that. Highlight down here. Put one there. And highlight should really kind of be the last thing you do, but I put them in just so you could see at the beginning where everything was. It's not usually how I paint. And once you put the little dits in, because these are so gnarly, need to mix more white, more Viridian. That the lights and darks are kind of just like I said, it's all random, so you look for a shape kind of where it is, but don't be afraid to put random shapes anywhere on the pepper itself. It's not going to hurt it. Every time I lay down a little bit of this Viridian green, I pick up some red as well. Yeah, but I keep on mixing in that pile. That's fine. It's not going to hurt it. Nice highlight there. Nice highlight here. Don't cover everything that you had before. And this is like boom, boom. Making sounds when you paint, it's the best part. Talking to yourself is fantastic. That's why live streaming is great. Basically, everything I'm saying, it's kind of what's going on in my head. There we go. And now, even the stems here. I just painted them simple green, but we're going to go a little bit warmer down here in the shadow area, and we'll keep the value a little bit darker. Just because of the shadow, I didn't really put any shadow in yet. Keep the edges soft. Has nothing to do with temperature, but just in general, soft edges create a more painterly subject. And if we wanted, we could always go back into this violet. Maybe for these deep dark shadows on the pepper stem, we could go with some violet as well. There we are. So you can see there's quite a bit of temperature shifting in this now. So let's zoom in. Right, so we have our original hot red. We have our cooler violet, a little red, warmer red. Then we have the really warm orange. In person, this is really warm. This is hotter than the red itself. Right, and then we have our darks, which are created with alizarin crimson and some violets. We have our Viridian green and white, and we also have our cerulean blue and white with a little bit of red in it. Here we have our deep violets, Here we have a little bit of warmer oranges, but this warmer orange is not as hot as this hot orange. And so what it does is it creates a sense of variety. Easy variety. There we go. So I used the peppers just so you can see it in an object. Next, we're going to do it in a landscape in large areas. So just let me reset here for a second. So, simple landscape. Values are pretty much established. You have your trees, you have your clouds, you have your sky. A little bit of water here, and we have a large ground plane here. And this is just more or less a wash that I have in there. Pretty simple. So we want to create a little more interest in this scene through temperature shifting. And so one thing we could do, this is a copy of a plein air piece that I did quite a while ago now. So these back trees, we could start creating this little more interest by having these trees a little bit cooler. As we come, it'll make this value a little bit warmer. So I know that having a standard palette really helps, because I know that value is created with an ultramarine blue and my transparent red earth and white. So I just got to get the right value and match the temperature, which shouldn't be that hard because it's just two pigments. Value's off. So is the temperature. So 3 ways I can change temperature. One, ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, or my Viridian. That's way too dark. Still dark. And I think the value's off, the temperature's off a little bit. It's deceivingly how light it is. Okay, so value is really close. So we'll add a chunk of ultramarine blue, which means we'll have to add a chunk of white, because ultramarine blue not only cools it, but it darkens it. So that's too dark. A little more white, and then we have an advantage that the white already cools. So I think we'll add a little bit of cerulean and a little bit of white. Just trying to get it really cool, just so you can see the difference. So that's quite a bit cooler. We'll go even farther, maybe we'll exaggerate it and go really blue. And same value. So we'll cool it with a little bit of white. So that's really, there's a tree here that I'm going to be putting in later. There we go. So now we have a cool tree to warm trees. And all it does is it helps guide the eye. It helps create interest within here. You could maybe put a little bit of some blue within these areas here, maybe in between these trees when all these branches will be a lot cooler. We could go back in and maybe we'll warm it up a little bit. We'll warm up the worms. Trying to keep the same value. It's a little bit off. I spend more time mixing than I do painting sometimes. So there you go. We warmed this up quite a bit now. So now there's a big difference between the two. So we have warmer trees and we have cooler trees. If you want to get into it a little bit more, we could shift the cool maybe to a little bit of green, or shift the warm to a little bit of the yellow. It all depends how much more detail, more interest you want to put in the area. But see, since these are distant trees, we don't really need to do much. Now let's take the sky, for example, up top. Let's say we want to create a really nice warm glow behind these trees. What we can do is we can start taking this sky color, which is cerulean, and the white, well, a lot of white, and then, which I believe was grayed down a little bit, not much. But what we're going to do now, we'll consider this the cool, and we'll add a little bit of yellow, and I use Hansa Yellow Medium. So put a little bit of yellow in it. You know, and you could argue, yes, well, Michael, doesn't that change it to green? If you look at it on a piece of paper, yes, but it'll look like a warmer blue. Value is wrong. We got to warm that up. Lighten it. So now the sky, we're making it a little more warm on this one side, maybe close to the trees. We'll repaint the trees in a minute. Maybe we can add some of this warmth into these cloudy areas up here. Just to give a little more interest. Right here. So already now we have a gradation from cool to warm. Now if we wanted to really accentuate that, because if the sun's over here on the right hand side, it's also going to be lighter. So let's just add a little bit of white to that. Meanwhile, add a bit of yellow just so we can enhance it. So now that we have a really warm sky and a little bit lighter, it'll pop out more from the scene. So now we go from cool to really warm. Same goes for this little ochre path that we have back here. It's all pretty much the same static value and temperature, but we could create a lot more interest by making it warmer. We'll take a little bit of that ochre, that orange that I love so much, white, and that value is a little bit too light, although it could be good if we want to accentuate that area, but right now I'm just going to mix the same value more than anything. Because the whole idea is just mixing it to the same value. And you know you've matched the same value when you squint, and the stroke that you put down, the edges kind of melt together. So we'll warm that up. Maybe it goes in between the trees a little bit. And then at that point, if you decide that you want to really accentuate it, you can go lighter and warmer as well. And the warmth is all relative. So just because we add white doesn't necessarily mean it's going to cool it down, because the pigment that I'm using is so vibrant. I did have to add a little more pigment there. There we go. So now we got some really hot grass path back there. And just so you can see what I'm talking about, we'll zoom in a little bit. So that you can see a little bit different, right? This is cooler, and as it comes in, it comes warmer and lighter. All right. Now, same thing for this path here. This is the edge of the grass area. So this green, it was just a viridian, hence yellow, and some white. Test it. And so this mixture is a little bit warmer. So I put that in the foreground. Generally foreground stuff is a little warmer. So now it's warm here, but it goes back cool. And this hodgepodge of forward grasses is pretty much one value and uninteresting. So what we're going to do is we're going to mix it up a little bit. We're going to throw in some viridian and ochre. It'd be a warmer value, or yeah, warmer mix than what we have. Put in a few grasses where you think they might be. And it could be a little bit lighter because it is a ground plane. Ground plane usually receives a little more light. There we go. So grass is becoming a little more warmer. And shifting the same color temperature, or different color temperatures in the same value, is really good for large open areas like this. So let's take the same mixture that I have and we'll add cerulean blue. I'm not going to use the green or the viridian because we used it to mix the initial tone. So we're going to go a little more blue, and that changes the temperature. Gotta make sure, yeah, see, so when we put this here, you can tell those values are pretty much the same because when you squint, the edges disappear. So we have some cool within the warms. Now you keep it cool around the shadow, maybe around the edges. And you're just putting in the, well, you're looking at your scene or your photo and trying to find the patterns within the grass. I'm just kind of winging it right now to create some interest. Right? But there's nothing to say that we couldn't add some violet in there. We'll keep the chroma high. See what happens. Right? But the violet will be, that's the same value. Right? And the violet, because of the chroma, really makes it look warmer. And we have quite a bit more interest going on in these grasses now than we did before. Maybe putting the violet up here beside the yellow help create a little bit of an interest, complementaries, and all that jazz. Maybe a spot down here. Let's make some really warm grasses, so maybe we'll take that green that we originally had and we'll add a bit of yellow. Hence the yellow I find is a nice yellow because it's a, that's a yellow medium especially because it can go warm or cool. I find it makes really good greens with ceruleans and cobalts. But I find that it also is a beautiful warm yellow as well. So this is kind of all the same values still. Put this up here as well. Maybe there's an interest down here. So this is the base of the grasses. Maybe put that in there to darken a little bit. All right, and from this point, let's say you're done the grass, but you want to create a little more detail. Well, how do you do that? Easy enough. You just mix your really warm, well, depending if this is all in shadow, maybe a cool light. But this is generally a warm light, so we'll mix yellow, Hansa yellow, and our ochre in a value that's lighter than what we have. Do a test. Yep. And this is a script brush, so it's really long, round. And what we can do perhaps is just create a few grasses sticking up here and there. So it'll give the illusion of detail. Overlaps are really good to get a sense of depth. Some of these grasses are over here. Hey Lucas, just saw your comment, sorry. How do you decide to use violet for shadows instead of blue? It was just a decision I decided to make because it wasn't there. That being said, I can use blue. So let's give that a shot. I would call that a little more instinctual of what I want to achieve. So let's just mix, well, since Ultra has red in it, and we want a blue, let's go with just cerulean. But we got to get the value right, so we got to add a little bit of white. So it doesn't matter what color you put in here. You can pick any color. You can put all the colors if you really wanted to. Color is irrelevant as long as you get the right value for every mixture that you have. It's going to look fine. That's too dark. And so I just think of blue as a cool temperature. So I want to put if I'm putting blue in here, I'm putting a really, really cool temperature in here. Whereas the violet is a little bit warmer, right? I think I can go a little bit lighter. So this is probably the coolest I can go. And so it adds another sense of interest. Maybe we only have this blue over here on the left hand side. I'll cover some of the grass marks that I have. And so what that does, if you put this blue everywhere, well, it might start making things look less interesting. And then later on, you could always use this blue as well. And we could start putting it into the trees. Just because we're going to use another cool value in the trees, you might as well make it, well, if we're going to use all the colors anyway, it doesn't really matter what you put, but generally I see a lot of blues within the trees. So if we were to zoom in a little bit and come down, you can see those blues, those violets, those greens, all kind of blend. You squint and it all kind of blends together. You open your eyes and you can see all the different values, or not all the, you can see all the different temperatures in there, and that just makes it interesting. And it's free. You don't have to worry about doing every single detail in the painting. And if I just leave it zoomed in here and I add a few grasses here and there, right, you start going, oh geez, look at that detail. But there's no detail or whatever. The interest is created by the temperature shifting, and that's the beauty of it. It's relatively easy once you get your head around it. It's free. You just got to do a little bit of thinking, and then these little details here, that's what brings out the interest in the painting. It's never easy getting it back to where it was, is it? There we go. So you can see all these little marks when we zoomed in a little bit easier. So maybe that tells me that from a distance they won't read that well. Always step back 8-10 feet from your painting, then come back. So if I step back, those marks get kind of lost. So let's make them a lot lighter and keep them warm. So this is off topic a little bit. And put a few really light ones in here. So now you can start seeing them in camera as well, and I can start seeing them as I step back further. But the success of that area, right, instead of just having that as, an ochre, a dirty ochre for the dirt path, now it's just comprised of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 colors, you could argue. But it's really all the same value, and it's just 5 temperature shifts. And then along with that, if you want to create a little more interest, well, you need to get a little bit dark. We have these darks down here, but how does that work for the rest of the painting? It'd be nice if there's, this line comes through here. Just some more shadow patches here and there. You can play with it. Some are bigger, some are smaller. Right? Now, since we've been talking trees, let's talk about the trees here. We could go light on the bark. Tree bark isn't brown. You might think it is, but if you really start to train your eye, it isn't really brown. It's a variety of colors. So now we're putting in a little warmer value here next to the blue that I put in. Just to get the shape of the tree. That's pretty much why I'm lightening the value. This tree's off to the right so far that doesn't really matter. But let's say I want to throw a little bit of orange in this tree, I can. All I need is the correct value. So this is that orange again, but it's highly chromatic. And so I'm just trying to get the right value. So now we got this tree is really popping because of the orange. And say this tree could be the highlight of the batch. And we'll break up that line a little bit because it got a little bit of overkill. But we can go into the violet of instead of the blue there. We could always see if we could add a violet to create the interest. Heck, you could even go to some Viridian. As long as you got the right value. Let's see here. That's probably a bit light, yeah. So learning to mix color to the proper value is one of the biggest steps I'd say in painting. Yeah. So just Viridian. But what it is, it's cool. So now we really have what might be a bit too much up there. We could throw a little bit in here as interest into the secondary tree. All right. Then we could actually go crazy if we wanted to and use like a cerulean blue for a super cool value at specific locations on the bark. All right, you don't want to do too much, just here and there. If you don't like where you put it, you can always take it off. All right, so you can see it from the camera position there, but I'll just zoom in on it. See if I can focus that a little bit better. Here we go. So in this tree alone, now we have the darker values to define the form. But within this frame right here, we have a warm orange, right? We have a cool green, although those chromas are pretty high. We have quite a dull chroma brownie color, but that's all the same value. And this lighter blue for more of the highlights. So if you squint, generally this area here, they all kind of blend together in that light area, in that the lightish area. The blue is kind of more of a highlight than anything else, but a lot more interest for a tree rather than just brown bark. I'm gonna hire a cameraman here. So, and the same can go for your branches. So instead of just brown branches, branches are never the same value as the tree. They're always going to be a little bit lighter because they're surrounded more by air, by light. So for these branches, you can start with a warm, and we'll just put some random branches in here. These script blender brushes are great for branches as well. Maybe one coming up right from the bottom. And so we could use that. We can go straight into a lighter blue mixture, which is really cool in terms of the temperature. And so for this part of the branch, this is probably not a good example because we're over the sky. So maybe over this darker area here, where it comes into the warmth of the clouds, we could put the blue. Really cool value. It starts getting a little bit too light over there, so you got to control your values. Right? And if you want, though, you could always probably go to something a little warmer. We'll kill that chroma a little bit too vibrant. There we go. Make sure the value is the same. A little bit too dark, especially for a branch. Branches are generally pretty light. There you go. So maybe this would be a nice warm temperature of this branch along the clouds. You can see how light it is if I put it on a tree. It acts like a kind of a highlight. But so the temperature shifting doesn't necessarily just apply to large masses. It also applies to small things like just regular old branches. And it's just something to keep in mind. The variety. A painting with a lot of variety is a lot more successful than one without a lot of variety. So let's say, kind of the last thing we're going to do here is, let's say this green back here is a little bit too green. As we get in the distance, we want to create a little more cooler. So I know that it was created with Viridian and my Hansa Yellow. I mean, you'll have your own set palette. You have to determine what's cool and what's warm, and really work with it to understand it. And to cool it down, though, I'm going to use some cerulean blue. And let's go extreme. Let's put quite a bit of cerulean in it. Put some white in there to make sure we match the value. It's probably a little bit too much white. So we got to get our value back. So now that green is quite a bit cooler than what was there. So if I put a mark there, you can see actually how much cooler it is. So this mark here is a lot cooler than that. You squint though, they're the exact same value. So all I did was just cool the background. Now if we wanted, because let's say, I mean this tree here, let's say there's a tree here, but we find our focus of attention comes here too much, well, that's easy. So we made a decision to make this cooler, but because now it draws too much attention, we're going to make it darker regardless of what your photo or what you're doing on site is. So what we're going to do is we're just going to darken it. Throw in quite a bit of cerulean, quite a bit of Viridian. So it still maintains the cool, but now it's quite a bit darker. So as we come across, you can see now that, oh yeah, I don't really come here as much as I used to when that was a lighter value. That's why values are king. You really need to play with your values. Even if you're, let's say the photograph or your scene, this was really light value back here, but your focus is on the trees, you've decided that, don't put it in. Just because you see it doesn't mean you have to put it in there. Right? Make it a decision to modify it a little bit. Now let's say we want to throw a little bit of violet in there. Sure, let's throw a little bit of violet in there. We'll mix that violet into the original mixture, just so it's not stark violet. It darkened it, so I need to add a little bit of white. And so now we're just going to add a little bit of violet mixture. I might have darkened it a little bit too much. So it killed the green a lot, but it also added a little bit of violet to it. So now it has a mixture of a little bit of cool, has a mixture of a little bit of warm, all in that value. So it had a little bit of interest and vibration there. So I've been going for about an hour now. I think I got my point across. I just wanted to show everybody from a practical sense how to shift temperatures in the same value for interests in a painting. It really helps create a sense of variety, a sense of vibration, a sense of interest throughout. I really highly recommend you give this a try. This video is in complement to an article I'm writing for the International Artist Magazine, and it should come out in the January issue, I think, 2022. And this video will be available when that article comes out. But for now, after this live stream, it's going to be archived until the video comes out. So thanks for sticking with me. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for watching it. Oh, sorry, what should we have cut earlier? We have rewind when you be gone. Yeah, when the article comes out in January, it will be available. Unless you email me directly right now at mrking@michaelking.ca, what I can do is I can just send you the link and you can watch it. Because I am going to put it as unlisted, which I'm fine for doing. I'm more than happy to share it with you if you're here and you missed it. Train of thought. Can't remember. Sorry. Thanks for coming with me. Thanks for staying here. Thanks for watching this after the article came out. Check out my website at michaelking.ca. If you're on Instagram, you can find me at michaelking.ca. And if you're interested in Patreon mentoring, I'm available on Patreon as well. You can probably find the link in the description below, but it's basically patreon.com/michaelkingart. Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming. Cheers.